from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Jobs Day collides with new tariffs, and Wall Street is in a bad mood. Welcome to the Friday edition as job growth falls short, prompting a new round of calls for interest rate cuts, just as the White House details tariffs for most all of our trading partners. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. And Kailey, we're going to get to all of these stories over the course of the next hour on Bloomberg TV and radio, as well as a massive breaking story. Just moments ago, you heard it happen here on Bloomberg. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is closing down, Kailey, after the defunding rescissions package that just passed a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that rescissions package, of course, clawing back billions of dollars in funding. Well, it's a drop in the bucket when we think about overall federal expenditures. Yeah. For the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, it shutting down could mean that it basically directly hundreds, if not thousands, of local stations across the country could be shutting down. It's one of the very concerns that were raised by those who were reluctant to support the rescissions package, like the Republican Senator Mike Rounds. Mike
Rounds and others from rural districts specifically were very concerned about what they described as a lifeline for people to get emergency information suddenly disappearing. And there was quite a bit of talk with the White House. They actually cut a deal with Mike Rounds to help fund Native American NPR stations that are near tribal regions of the country in states like his. There's no paper on that. We're not sure exactly how that would work. And to Kailey's point, this could in fact result in the closure of dozens, if not hundreds, of radio stations. The way PBS works with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is a bit different, and you could see individual programs, whether it's Frontline or Sesame Street or anything else, being impacted on that level as well. It looks as well, Kailey, like we have another breaker here that's coming from the White House.
Yeah, another red headline just crossing the terminal based on a True Social post from President Trump, who says he has deployed 2 nuclear submarines, citing specifically what he calls the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chair of Security Council of the Russian Federation. He says those nuclear submarines will be positioned in the appropriate regions. So layer that news geopolitically on top of tariffs, on top of this jobs report, we've got ourselves quite the Friday news day.
Well, isn't that right? It's going to be interesting to see how all of this lands on Wall Street, by the way, already upset with some of the news that we've had. It looks like we might be reaching a new lows of the session, Kailey.
Yeah, and the bond market moves are nothing to sneeze at either. So let's get a check on that now as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Lots of developing stories. We got you covered here at Bloomberg. Right to the numbers here. Fast-moving markets to the downside now, with the S&P tumbling 106, down 1.7%. We've got the Dow down 611 right now, down 1.4%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 485 for NASDAQ, a drop right now of 2.3%. Our NASDAQ 100 Index down 2%, and the Mag 7 Index is tumbling 3.2%. Two of those names after earnings, both lower. Apple right now down 2.7%. Amazon after earnings now dropping by 8.2%. Traders driving stocks toward their worst session since May as weak jobs and manufacturing data revive concerns about the economy. Our Stuart Paul's going to have a whole lot more on the economy coming up in just a moment. 10-year currently trading 4.22% with the 2-year, 3.70%. Spot gold surging $58 the ounce, up 1.8%, $33.48. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.4%, $67.64 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin down 1.5% at 114,746 on Bitcoin. Earnings news. Lots of companies reporting. ExxonMobil and Chevron posted better than expected results after record oil production cushioned the impact of lower crude prices. ExxonMobil down now by 2.2%, Chevron down by just about 0.4%. Again, a number of developing stories at this hour. President Trump deploying 2 nuclear submarines, citing a threat from Russia, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting winding down operations. Also, just getting word that Blackstone here in New York City will be reopening its New York headquarters on Monday after keeping the office shuttered in the wake of that shooting spree that killed 4 people, including one of its senior executives. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on these developing stories. I'm Charlie Pellet, back to go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet, checking on these jobs day markets. Thank you so much. Obviously, both the equity and bond market having a strong reaction to today's non-farm payrolls report. Just 70,000 or 73,000 jobs added, downward revisions. Also something to pay attention to as we're looking at over the course of the last 3 months. On average, the slowest jobs growth we have seen since back in the pandemic era. Raising the question as to whether or not maybe it was Governor Waller, not Chairman Powell, who was singing the right tune at the Fed's decision this week to not lower interest rates. Waller, of course, was citing concern over the labor market. And as we consider the overall state of the labor market, we actually had a chance here at Bloomberg TV and radio to catch up with the Labor Secretary, Lori Chavez-DeRemer, earlier today. And this is how she characterized the figures.
Certainly, we know they could have been better. But, we look at the positive because we still have a net positive, almost 500,000 new jobs since the president took office. What has happened on the ground? The One Big Beautiful Bill by Congress, the president leaning in and keeping the promises made by negotiating fair trade deals for the American workforce. And now what we need is the Federal Reserve to jump in and lower those interest rates. I talked to businesses just yesterday who said, we've invested in our American workers. We're paying attention to our facilities. We're wanting to invest and borrow more money, but they're concerned with borrowing that more money.
So how did everybody get this so wrong? Stuart Paul joins us from World Headquarters in New York. Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist. Stuart, it's not just this month, the worst 3 months for job growth since the pandemic. And when you look back to the past couple of months here, massive revisions, prompting the question, how could we be so far off for so long?
There are a few things to keep in mind. The first is that, yes, payroll growth has been marked down. We always knew that payrolls were being overstated. In particular, we knew that private payrolls are being overstated. They still probably are being overstated. We saw 83,000 additional jobs added in the private sector. The revisions that we saw to past months' data and the weakness that we saw in the July report was mostly because of government hiring. Now, as you spoke with Molly Smith earlier today, and she has a great story about this on the terminal, there are seasonal adjustment factors at play that are affecting particularly state and local employment in the field of education. When those workers were marked as being on payrolls in the month of June, it didn't fully interact with the seasonal adjustment factor perfectly. So it's not a true shock that either payrolls are being marked down or that there are peculiarities in the interaction between actual headcount and some of the seasonal adjustment factors that are estimated at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yes, the labor market is cooling. Yes, today's data validates some of the arguments that we heard from Governor Waller just 2 weeks ago today on Bloomberg TV, where he was warning about a cooling labor market. But all things considered, a 0.1 percentage point uptick in the unemployment rate is really going to be the thing that matters for the broader swath of members of the Federal Open Markets Committee, for our monetary policymakers. And as we heard just this morning from from Regional Fed President Beth Hammack, she said, look, hot inflation right now means that the Fed is failing more on the price stability side of its mandate than it is on the maximum employment side of its dual mandate with just a 4.2% unemployment rate. So I don't think that either the headline numbers, the revisions to the headline numbers, or the balance of risk for the Fed has really materially changed with today's report. I see that markets are pricing in a bit more risk, considerably more risk, that the Fed would move in September. Yeah. But all things considered, our base case is still for a December move, just 25 basis points in December.
But where could the labor market ultimately be by then, Stuart, if the Fed stands pat for that long?
Well, look, we've been expecting the unemployment rate to continue rising. It would not come as a major shock to me to see the unemployment rate reaching, let's say, 4.5% at that point. That still puts us relatively more bearish on the labor market than most forecasters out there. But in terms of where we are in managing the Fed's balance of risks, with persistent core inflation, even a 4.5% unemployment rate might not be enough for the Fed to move. And if it's the case that nominal GDP growth is still running, well above what would be consistent with, let's say, the 2% target, that 2% inflation target, plus maybe 1 percentage point of real growth, I think it's fair to say that the Fed would remain on hold even if we saw a 4.5% unemployment rate.
All right, Stuart, we appreciate it as always. Stuart Paul is a U.S. economist for us at Bloomberg Economics, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. And joining us now for more in our Washington, D.C. studio is Ben Harris. He's Vice President and Director of Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution, also former Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy and Chief Economist at the Treasury Department. Ben, great to have you back here and to see you in our studio. As we consider these jobs figures today and the downward revisions, knowing that just days ago the Fed made the decision not to ease policy, maybe that would have been a different decision had they had these figures in hand. Do you think Chairman Powell maybe made a mistake this week?
I don't think he made a mistake this week. He's been put in this impossible position. You've got a labor market which is clearly in freeze mode. And so my interpretation of today's report is I don't remember a jobs report that provided so much clarity, because it's not just about the past month, it's about the past 3 months, right? So with the revisions, we are clearly in a situation where employers are freezing hiring. They're taking care of the workers they have, but we're only adding 35,000 jobs or so a month, and most of that is the healthcare sector. So you've got a labor market which is frozen, but on the prices side, it's very clear that we're in the middle of an inflationary episode because of tariffs, right? And so you would expect the normal lag to be 3 to 5 months after tariffs are implemented. The Fed is in an impossible position. Prices are rising. The labor market is stagnant. So I don't think that Powell made a mistake, but he's been put in this position, a position he did not ask for.
How's it going to feel in September if this kind of deterioration continues?
So if the labor market stays the same and we see the hikes that we're expecting in prices,
further.
Yeah, it's sort of like, what is the worst case? What's the worst shock? So are we seeing prices rise more than we thought? Are we going to see core PCE go above 3%? I mean, if core PCE is above 3%, how can the Fed possibly start cutting? It can't, even if the U3 is at 4.3, 4.4, 4.5.
Yes, okay.
And so if prices continue to rise the way we expect them to, I don't think the Fed can cut, and markets disagree right now. So you see this big one-day change between yesterday and today. Yesterday, markets thought the Fed will cut between 1 and 2 times between the end of the year, between 25 and 50 bips. Now markets are certain the Fed will cut by at least 50 bips, maybe 75. But I think that maybe they're misinterpreting the impact of these higher prices owing to tariffs.
Well, so let's talk about those tariffs. Obviously, it's August 1st.
Yeah.
While the levies aren't actually going to be collected until August 7th, so there's still a bit of wiggle room here. We're looking, according to Bloomberg Economics, at an aggregate tariff rate on average that's going to move up to 15.2%. What difference will that ultimately make in the prices people see at the store and how it actually tracks into inflation gauges?
So the rule of thumb is that for every percentage point increase in the average tariff rate, you see a 0.10 increase in the inflation rate. So if you're going from around a rate of around 3%, like we saw at the beginning of the Trump administration, up to 15, we're talking about 1.2 percentage points increase in inflation, which is a lot in a short period of time. And you're starting to see prices get passed through in exactly the way we would have predicted. So you can look at things like recreational goods. You can look at things like home furnishings. These are things we import from China, and those prices are rising. And so it's very clear that the tariffs are having an inflationary impact.
We're going to talk with Peter Navarro on the late edition of Balance of Power. He has sat in that chair and argued, and he would fight with you right now on the idea that tariffs are inflationary. And you've heard this line from the White House, that when you have a one-time change in prices, that it's a different phenomenon. You're seeing a trend, though, that will continue.
So I don't agree with Peter Navarro on almost anything.
I understand.
But I do agree that it is a one-time shock.
Okay.
And so when I look at tariffs, I think that the real concern with them is not the inflationary impact, for the reasons that Navarro says. It's a one-time shock. That's bad news. It's terrible timing. It's a time when you'd like to see the Fed be able to cut, and it can't. Okay. The real problem with tariffs are that it has eroded the United States' credibility as a trading partner. And you're seeing that in terms of not just trading, but also investment. Investment has been stagnant despite this $4 trillion bill. And so if you look at sort of the average tariff rate on China, they're all over the place. Tariffs started off at 10%. They went to 20%. Yeah. They're at 104% for a while, 145. Now they're down to 30. I don't know what they're going to be in 3 months. Neither does Peter Navarro. Neither does President Trump. who would want to trade with someone who's rapidly switching prices like that so frequently? So it's not this one-time price shock from tariffs that really concern me. It's the erosion of our credibility as a trading partner.
Well, when we consider the investment question which you raised, the White House would contend they've had trillions of dollars in investment pledges coming in from various governments or companies announcing they're going to be building more manufacturing capacity in the U.S., even if some of that money had already been previously announced as well. Even if it does materialize, how long does it actually take to translate into more demand for labor, more American jobs, if it were to work as they say it's designed?
So the White House has no credibility on this point. The White House has no credibility on this point because we have an example in the first Trump administration. We had that phase one deal with China, where we had hundreds of billions of dollars of commitments that China had no intention of fulfilling, and that the administration did nothing to ensure that it was fulfilled. There's outstanding confusion around these trade deals. Let's just be clear about what these trade deals are. They're frameworks. So the USMCA bill that was signed in the first Trump administration was 1,800 pages. The trade framework with the UK, which was the most comprehensive so far, was 5. These are not trade deals. There's massive confusion. You can look at the Japanese trade deal, $550 billion of investment pledges. Japan said, these aren't really investment pledges. These are loans at market rates.
The White House called it a blank check.
Yeah. And
so what happens 6 months to a year from now when they're trying to draw down this cash?
No one knows. No one knows. And so if I was going to characterize the U.S. economy right now, it would be chaos and confusion. And you're seeing that in businesses. You're seeing it from business leaders. They're saying, I don't know what's going to happen with trade. I don't know what's going to happen with the regulation. So what I'm doing is I'm standing pat until there's some clarity. This is really bad for American business.
Well, so should it be bad for American markets or U.S. equity markets? Because until today, where, yes, you are seeing some significant downward pressure, we were hovering around record highs. It seemed like everybody was in a pretty good mood, or at the very least willing to look through the president's latest tariffs.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is during the transition between administrations, the way that economists and the way the financial markets were looking at the Trump administration was this kind of fight between, on the good side, you have this massive tax cut coming and you've got widespread deregulation. And a lot of executives are really excited about that. And then on the other side, you have pretty stark tariffs and a really aggressive anti-immigration platform. And so you have this fight between these two different factors. It's clear that the negative impacts of tariffs and going to zero immigration, which we haven't talked about yet, but I think is a real factor, is beating the positive impacts of this really expensive tax package and deregulation. So I think that's what you're seeing in equity markets today.
Participation in the jobs report today fell to the lowest level in months. Does that suggest full employment? People are sitting on their hands waiting for something. You add a number of mass deportations. What's that number going to look like, say, the end of this year?
So in terms of participation, when I'm looking at some of the alternative labor market metrics, you're seeing there are a lot of people who want to work who aren't. And after you spend enough time looking for a job, you're eventually going to start dropping out. And so you can expect that to happen. That's what happens, as you guys know, when economies weaken. In terms of immigration, I mean, the answer has to be, I don't know. So going back to 1990, outside of COVID, we have added in net migration in the United States between 1 million and 1.8 million people every single year. This happened during the first Trump administration. It happened during Clinton. We're about to go close to zero. So you look at estimates coming out of my colleagues at Brookings, we think we're going to be anywhere between minus 500,000 and plus about 150. We have never seen anything like that. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means for housing markets. It's probably bad for certain industries like agriculture, fishing, some manufacturing. But this is an unprecedented experiment, and we're all going to go on a bit of a ride here.
We need to stay in touch on a lot of things here, Ben Harris. It's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
With Brookings, now, of course, a veteran of the Biden administration's Treasury Department. Great analysis on this Jobs Day and Tariffs Day. What are we calling this? Is this Liberation Day again, or that's a week from now?
If it is, it would have to be like
August 7 is when they take effect.
Right.
Okay, so we'll call it that again in a week. We'll assemble our political panel next alongside Kailey, Leinz. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg. What a busy Friday this has become. Friday news dump. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is closing down. We did learn that today, along with the tariff rates that will be taking effect a week from now. One of the more important stories that you may not hear about, and I'm looking at you, Boston, if you're listening to us now on 92.9 FM. It's called Drive, a new initiative by the governor of Massachusetts, and it has everything to do with federal funding or the lack thereof. DRIVE stands for Discovery, Research, and Innovation for a Vibrant Economy. And Governor Maura Healey is pushing this idea right now. Joining us live from my former hometown of Boston, Governor Healey, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. You've carved out $400 million here, an investment pool to help create jobs, to help fund research. Anyone who's been to Boston knows the dozens of research hospitals that are there, never mind the scores of universities that you have in the city and across the state. Is this a direct response to the cuts that have come from the Trump White House?
Well, Joe, thanks for having me on. And I'm really excited about this. This is what this is about. This is an investment in the Massachusetts economy. It's about job creation, and it's about the recognition that 1 in 10 research and development jobs in the United States, 1 in 10, are here in Massachusetts. We have the highest percentage of STEM graduates. Per capita, we receive the greatest amount of venture funding. We also receive the greatest amount of NIH funds. Research drives and powers the Massachusetts economy. And in the face of some uncertainty from the federal government, and sure, funding going away in some respects, I thought it was really important to lean in and to send a message, not just to the United States, but to the world. If you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, a scientist, a researcher, Massachusetts is where you want to be. We will continue to be a place that powers the world with our research, with our science. We will continue to be the place that incubates all those cures and treatments and discoveries that have really transformed the world. And that is the message that I'm trying to send with this public investment in research, which we hope to leverage with additional private dollars to really make this thing go. I'm very excited about it and what it's going to mean, not just for Massachusetts, but for the United States.
Well, Governor, that's what I wanted to ask you. As you talk about this being about job creation, but in some degree, if funding is going down, it also has to be about protecting existing jobs. So do you see the need here for this $400 million to actually grow to something much more substantial? Does that number need to get higher ultimately?
Well, Kailey, I'd love to see it grow. It's also the case, let me just explain, when I talk about research jobs, know that for every research job here that is funded, that is supported, that is spinning off so many other jobs in construction, in real estate, in hospitality, in restaurants, and retail. So it's such an important catalyst for so much. And when I think about our incredible teaching hospitals, our colleges and universities, they've had funding hits, as you know, and that directly impacts economic growth and progress, not just for Massachusetts, but for the United States, because we're competing against China. China is the one who's looking to recruit our scientists and our researchers and those who are in our labs today. I want those folks staying in Massachusetts, staying in the United States, and I want them to continue to be part of what has been so essential to American GDP and growth and dominance around the world.
I guess my question for you in this case, Governor, is would this be necessary if the federal government maintained the funding that Massachusetts was already enjoying? Or was this something that you wanted to reach for beyond the federal funding that you've seen come into Beacon Hill and do something more for research in Massachusetts? Was this idea underway before President Trump and the DOGE and the cuts?
Well, I'll say that the DOGE and the NIH cuts certainly put a focus on this and not only the primacy of research here, but the need now to make sure that is really supported. It's also the case that we did not see prior to Donald Trump's actions the efforts to recruit on our campuses, at our teaching hospitals, at our preeminent world-renowned research institutions here in Massachusetts, the presence of so many people from so many countries looking to lure American talent and intellectual assets away. So it absolutely has been precipitated by what we've seen from the federal government. That said, as governor, I would have wanted to make this investment anyways, because this is about growth and innovation in our economy, which has always driven Massachusetts jobs and economic success here.
Governor, as you well know, President Trump and his administration are in a bit of a battle with Harvard University specifically, and there has been reporting in recent days that Harvard is looking to spend, or open to spending at least, up to $500 million to settle with the administration. A group of House and Senate Democrats have now sent a letter to Harvard suggesting there will be a rigorous investigation if the school ultimately cuts a deal such as that. What would you advise Harvard to do here?
Well, I haven't spoken with Harvard about this, and my hope is Harvard will make a decision that is in the best interests of academic freedom. I think that's really important and central to American higher ed. So we'll see how that goes. But, I have expressed my concerns about what the Trump administration has done in weaponizing, whether it's DOJ or other things, against Harvard and other universities in an attempt to essentially silence critics, silence academic freedom. And, that's just, to me, un-American.
Governor Healy, you've been pretty outspoken about your opposition toward the president's tariff regime as well. With Canada specifically in mind here, you launched the Tariff Response and Business Operations Support Initiative to support local business, and you gathered a bunch of Northeastern governors and Canadian premiers back in June to talk about this. Canada is really feeling it. They're at 35% now, it looks like, outside of the USMCA. We looked at the numbers here. Massachusetts exported $3 billion in goods to Canada in 2024, making it the state's third largest trading partner. What will these tariffs on Canada mean for your economy?
Well, tariffs are a tax. And, I'm a governor who is trying to build housing as quickly as possible in my state. My lumber comes from Canada, right? So, that's just one example of how reckless this is. Canada is our largest trading partner, of course, and the reason I brought together Canadian premiers and Northeast governors a few weeks ago was to send a message. We are your friends. We are your allies. We want to continue to do business with you. We want to continue to structure energy deals and, support tourism and support trade. I mean, it is so integral to our economies on both sides of the border. So, it's terribly disappointing, terribly frustrating to see the president continue to hammer on our great friend to the north. And it's going to hurt households and businesses here. And that's why I've tried to be proactive, reaching out, meeting with my Canadian allies and colleagues, working together with other governors on this issue, and also supporting our businesses here who are already feeling it. I'm all for reshoring, okay? Let's be sensible and smart about what it is that's practical to reshore and what isn't. And as governor, I'm very focused on this and just continue to be really dismayed at the devastation caused by this, because it's also the uncertainty, right? You don't have capital deployed in your state or in this country. You have people turning away from the United States for investment. That's not good for American competitiveness. That is not putting America first.
Well, when we consider the uncertain nature of the president's tariff policy, knowing how frequently, Governor, that they have changed or deadlines have moved, is it so simple for businesses in Massachusetts? The tariffs go away. OK, great. We can make a different decision. Or do they have to think differently about that? I just wonder to what extent the impact will be permanent regardless of the decisions of the president.
Kailey, that's a great point, because you have to make decisions, judgments in real time about orders, right? For parts, for supplies. You have to figure out how you're going to source things. And it has become incredibly difficult for so many companies to try to figure this out. It's hard for the largest companies, right? And imagine all the small businesses who have been affected in Massachusetts and elsewhere. I'll also give you an example, because looking out behind me is the beautiful Boston skyline. This is the time of year where we like a lot of people to come, tourists, visit New England, visit Massachusetts. All of us are getting killed. Tourism numbers are off in New England between 20 and 60% as a result of our mistreatment of our Canadian friends who we count on to come here. So I'll still reach out my hand and hope to continue to find ways to do business, working with other governors, working with Canadian premiers, encouraging that, because we are in a global economy. Massachusetts is certainly in a global economy, and we need certainty, and we need this insanity to be put to bed and end.
I want to ask you lastly, Governor, about the effort to redistrict in the state of Texas and a trend that might become a national one as Republicans in Texas redraw the congressional map in an effort to generate 5 more seats that President Trump has asked for that are expected to be Republican seats, an effort to maintain the Republican majority, a very thin majority in the House. I bring this up with you because not only are you a Democratic leader in this country, but we talked to Senator Ted Cruz about this last night. And he brought up your state of Massachusetts. Listen to what he said.
I'm in particular amused at the Democrats who are clutching their pearls because the Democrats have always been much more ruthless in gerrymandering. I'll give you an example. The state of Massachusetts. State of Massachusetts, about 35% of Massachusetts votes Republican. About 60 to 65% votes Democrat. Do you know what percent of Massachusetts congressional delegation is Republican?
I believe it's 0. Yeah.
They drew it, so not a single Republican is elected.
I reminded him of some of the other redistricting phenomena that have happened that redistrict a couple of lawmakers right out of their own districts. I'm just wondering if he has a point there, Governor, and where you'd put the Republican seat in Massachusetts.
Well, first of all, I'm not clutching my pearls, Senator. What I am is a governor who believes in fair representation, and what's going on in Texas is just, it's an abomination right now, the effort to redraw those maps. The senator himself made the point, which is that 65% of the voters in Massachusetts happen to not be Republican. So we end up with a delegation that is right now all Democrat. But, I will do everything as governor to always ensure that there is fair play and fair representation. Clearly, there are governors elsewhere, like Governor Abbott, working together with AG Paxton, that are not about that. They are about playing games right now and playing politics to try to retain a very thin House majority. That's what's happening.
All right, Governor, we thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio live from our Boston bureau. The governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, here with us on Balance of Power, talking not just redistricting, but of course the economic impact being felt in Massachusetts by the policies of the Trump administration, be it cuts to funding for things like research or, of course, the tariff policy of the president, which is in focus today as we have the announcement, but not necessarily the collection yet, of these duties on a number of our trading partners, tariffs ranging from a 10% baseline all the way up to around 40% going into effect as of August 7th, on the very same day that we get a softer than expected jobs report at just 73,000 jobs. So for more on this, we turn to our political panel. Jeanne Zaino is with us, Democratic analyst, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Lisa Camooso Miller, Republican strategist, former RNC communications director, and host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Lisa, when we consider the president obviously stands by his economic policies, he has touted the strong GDP figures we got earlier this week. He believes tariffs are a good thing for America, not a bad thing. When you put them together with what we just heard from Governor Healey about how it's already impacting businesses and potentially hiring decisions with the softer jobs report, is he about to face the need to U-turn on this once again?
Oh, he'll never admit that what he's put in place is something that should be reversed, but he certainly will keep an eye on the markets and try to do everything he can to make it appear like he has won, that his policies are winning and that they're doing the right thing for the American economy. I think, though, that the market itself this morning reacted not only to the announcements that he offered last night as it relates to last-minute trade activity, but also this morning keeping a close eye on how that's going to all change and react in a real time. I think that the president probably is paying very close attention and will continue to retool, not in a retreat, but more in a way to say he's watching and he's paying attention. He's going to do whatever it can to make the economy a winner.
Jeanne, does Maura Healey have a model there for other states around the country to make up for the lack of federal funding, or is this a Massachusetts-specific issue when it comes to the many universities and research hospitals in that state?
Yeah, it really struck me listening to your conversation with Governor Healey. What a breath of fresh air. And this is what you hear more and more from voters. They are not turning to the federal government. They are turning to their local and state officials like Governor Healey to say, what do we do at this time of enormous uncertainty? And she does have a plan with this drive to address what has been taken from the state as a result of DOGE cuts and other things. And I think we will see other governors, left and right, Republican and Democrat, try to emulate that. But, you know, even more than the specifics, I feel like listening to her in a very common sense, calm way, she's talking about what so many people are feeling today as a result of tariffs, you know, the cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, so much unease going on. To hear that there are leaders on the ground who know what people are feeling and are prepared to address those is a reassuring and much reassuring needed conversation to have. So I was very grateful to listen to you all talk to her about what she's doing for her state so close to the Canadian border at this time of uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate going overtime with our panel here. Many thanks to Jeanne, Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and Lisa Camooso Miller, former RNC comms director. Look for her Friday Reporter podcast. Many thanks to you both for the insights. We've had a lot of breaking news today, including the winding down, the closure of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, making that announcement since we took air. And President Trump as well now moving 2 nuclear submarines to respond to what he's calling highly provocative statements from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. We're going to have a lot more on that in a conversation with Bloomberg Intelligence straight ahead. We do want to check Wall Street because this has not been a fun ride today following the jobs report, the tariff news. Charlie Pellet has the numbers for us live from World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, how's it going?
Thank you very much, Joe and Kailey. Right now, a lot of red on the screen. In fact, we are making a run for the worst level of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. Right now, down 112, right to the numbers here, fast moving to the downside with the S&P at 62.26. Looking at a loss now of 1.8%. Stocks extending that jobs-fueled slide. Right now, the Dow is down 641, decline of 1.5%, while NASDAQ is down 504. The NASDAQ Composite Index right now down by 2.4%. The Mag 7 Index down 3.2%, hit hard among some of the names in that index that are selling off today. Apple after earnings down 2.7%. Amazon after earnings now down by 8.5%. Jobs Friday with the 10-year, 4.22%, the 2-year, 3.70%. Gold up $59 the ounce, now surging 1.8%. The precious metal at $33.49 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.6%, $67.42 a barrel. Bitcoin just below $115,000 now, down 1.5%. And again, repeating our top story, one we're covering right here on Balance of Power. President Trump says the U.S. is moving 2 nuclear submarines to respond to what he calls highly provocative statements from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. And also, as we have been reporting since the top of the hour when we first got word, CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, says it will begin to wind down operations. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington once again. Your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie, we do thank you. We want to stick with this story involving Russia and the president's decision to move 2 nuclear submarines. He's talking, Kailey, about comments from the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. We've established that. So what did Medvedev say to prompt this? He took to social media earlier this week, writing, quote, "Trump's playing the ultimatum game with Russia. 50 days or 10. He should remember 2 things. 1, Russia is not Israel or even Iran. And 2, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war." He goes on to write, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. He had more to say than that, prompting the president here on social media to make the statement, ordering 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, he says, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. We're joined for more on this by Wayne Sanders, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Defense Research Analyst. Wayne is a retired Army colonel, and so it's always a pleasure to welcome Colonel Sanders back to the program. Wayne, where are these subs headed, and how important is this development?
So I think the fact that the president's talking about it does make it highly provocative, as you brought up. I think that's something that that he's using right now as a tactic, right? It is part of his information campaign to be able to say, hey, look, we have something off of your coast. Now, I think the important piece to understand, though, is that when you're looking at our nuclear submarine program, when you look at the Virginia-class submarine, Columbia-class submarine, that we are 10 years ahead from a technological perspective of Russia or China. And it's very, very difficult to find out where these things are anyway. And because of the stealth technology, because of what we use and how quiet they are, they could be anywhere anyway. So it's an opportunity for the president to say, hey, this thing is over there. That is an overt way versus some of the clandestine way that these things move anyway. And it's something that we have always been able to position our capabilities where they need to be at whatever time. Normally, they're just not publicized.
Okay, so they're sneaky, Wayne, but what capacity do they have? What actually can these things hold?
They have quite a bit of armament between Tomahawk cruise missiles as well as additionals. We are building towards the capacity for hypersonic missiles to be able to fire out of their vertical launch systems, the VLS, on that as part of the Navy's conventional prompt strike program as well. But they carry enough to the Virginia class from the Tomahawk's cruise missiles perspective to cause a lot of damage. And then when you look at the Columbia class, you are looking at your ballistic missile capability as well that's fired from those platforms. And they can reach pretty much anywhere in the world, based off of, especially from the Atlantic to Pacific or even through the Arctic.
So does this strike fear in the heart of the Kremlin? What does Vladimir Putin think of this?
Well, I think the fact that President Trump is saying it out loud is speaking volumes in that capacity. I think that Putin and crew would already know that we're going to have our capabilities within defense as well as strike range, no matter what. That's just part of why we have operational deployments of our naval capability to protect the U.S., right? It is a strategic ability for force projection, as we call it in the military side of the house, right? As they would call it. These are force projection measures to be where they need to be. You've seen President Trump use it normally on the carrier strike group side of the house that says, hey, I'm going to put the USS Gerald Ford in this area. I'm going to go and do this from an aircraft carrier. Well, along with that aircraft carrier comes a nuclear submarine. It's part of that package that normally goes out there. And so that's just part of the complement, along with destroyers and other things. For him to say that, hey, I'm just talking about the nuclear submarine piece, I think is a tactic to go after some of the fear in that perspective and say, hey, I'm doing this and you don't know where they're at.
Wow.
All right, Wayne, we appreciate you joining us on this breaking news. Wayne Sanders, who, of course, is a defense analyst for us at Bloomberg Intelligence, on this news that President Trump is deploying 2 nuclear submarines to what he calls the appropriate regions in a very direct threat to Russia. But of course, that's not the only threat he's issued against Russia recently. He's also threatening as soon as next week to impose secondary sanctions on Russia, or secondary tariffs, depending on what the president says at any given time, but specifically on buyers of Russian energy to try to choke off what is financing the Russian war regime. And while we await news on those secondary tariffs, we, of course, have gotten plenty of news today on other tariffs that are being imposed on U.S. trading partners, as it is Friday, August 1st, the date we have long waited for, though we may still need to wait even longer for these to actually become a reality, as these levies are not set to be collected until August 7th. But assuming they do go into effect and those collections start and importers start paying those taxes, Bloomberg Economics estimates that our average tariff rate is about to go to 15.2%. The question is, how will the American consumer feel about that, or the American voter specifically? And on that note, we turn to Frank Luntz. He is a politics and communications consultant, a pollster, of course, and also CEO of FIL Inc., and is here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Frank, welcome back to Balance of Power. Obviously, the president is very proud of his tariff policy. Yes, we didn't get the pomp and circumstance with this particular rollout that we got on Liberation Day on April 2nd. But how is it actually being received by the American electorate? Is that why we see his approval rating not doing so well?
Is received with a lot of questions. And what the public is asking for more than anything else right now is economic predictability. Tell me what prices are going to be like. Tell me what business is going to be like. Tell me what the economy is going to be like, because I don't need any more shocks. I don't need any more surprises. And you find this from those who work paycheck to paycheck, right up to the captains of industry. They simply want the predictability to be able to plan, to be able to prepare for whatever happens. And that's caused the instability of the tariffs, even though the economy is very stable, has had an impact on the president's approval ratings.
Look no further than Procter & Gamble, and I know you talked to a lot of major corporations, Frank, announcing this week that They plan to raise prices on about a quarter of consumer products because of the impact of tariffs. The idea of Charmin going up in price means what to consumers? Because we're hearing references to Joe Biden now when people are talking about Trumponomics. It might not be in the hard data, but people aren't feeling good about it. How do you deal with that scenario in the White House?
So I don't hear that at all. And there's a big difference between having to pay more for eggs, which the administration should acknowledge. It was not their responsibility. There was a health and safety issue with the chickens across the country, across the globe. But the public is acutely aware if gas prices go up or go down because they're living paycheck to paycheck, trying to make ends meet. And that's something that we were not used to in the first Trump administration. I don't see any comparison to Joe Biden, who's suffering through interest increases, inflation of 9%, sometimes higher. But make no mistake, the public is attuned to this. They're having more and more difficulty going to the supermarket, going to the gas station. And it's not just there, it's also with housing and with health care. So all I'm saying to the viewers is disconnect Trump and Biden, because it's not nearly as bad as what was going on. With that being said, make no mistake, if prices do go up, Trump's ratings will go down.
Well, of course, Frank, President Trump says that, OK, maybe prices will go up, but your taxes at the very least aren't going to go up. I made sure that my tax cuts from 2017 were made permanent through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Republicans are home in their districts right now on this congressional recess, selling that bill to their constituents, although maybe with varying degrees of success if you look at what's happening across town halls. What is the best messaging for it that Republicans can deliver or that Democrats can counter around?
Well, your point is a good one, that the Republicans have not been successful up to this point in communicating what's in that legislation. And the best in this area of taxes would be if the Republicans had not done what they had done, taxes would have gone up by record levels. And by Republicans doing what they did, the tax burden on the average American fell by multiple thousands of dollars. That's not being explained. It's not being educated to the public. And this is where the GOP has a great advantage. Their weakness is on Medicaid. Their strength is on taxes. If they had not done it, can you imagine what your tax bill would have been like next April? They should be saying it. They're doing it to some degree. But I'll tell you, from the work that we're doing, it is not being heard.
Interesting. Even though this is town hall season in the throes of August recess, when we're also hearing a lot about Jeffrey Epstein, Frank, this is a tough story for the president. And I'm wondering your thoughts on how he gets over this, how he moves beyond it. Is it as simple as just riding it out?
Well, he has to move beyond it because the public is not focusing on the legislation. They're focusing on this salacious scandal. And it doesn't make anybody look good. It causes people to doubt the behavior, not just of politicians, but of corporate leaders, of people at the top 1/10 of 1% of American society. And that's not good for the people in power. The best way for Trump to deal with it is to simply let the public, they have information that they want, need, and deserve. And the Trump administration should be on the side of providing that information. Because if they don't communicate the legislation, they're going to have a problem 1 year from now when the midterms happen. The trend over the last 50 years is for the party in power to lose control. So the president and his political party have to be talking about anything but the Epstein crisis, Epstein scandal, I would call it.
Well, as we think about the notion of the Republican Party losing control, President Trump wants to avoid that outcome by having Texas redraw its congressional map so that they pick up 5 new Republican seats. Frank, how does the American electorate view redistricting, this issue of gerrymandering that risks spreading all across the country far beyond Texas?
It's more politics as usual. It's more politicians making the effort to protect themselves rather than put the country first. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. My job as a pollster is to be straight about it. And it just reminds people that the politicians are more focused on their own preservation than the people that they're supposed to represent. And one other point about this. I promise you that if the Republicans do this now, the Democrats will follow, just as what's happening now in the United States Senate, where the Senate Democrats are doing everything they can to slow down the nomination process, which once again is not good for the American country, American people. If the Democrats do that, the Republicans will follow. We are fighting an endless game, and it's not a game, and it's not a war. It should be about people, not about partisanship. And it's one of the reasons why the Americans are so pessimistic about the future and so angry with institutions right now.
It's been a long time, Frank. It's good to have you back. Frank Luntz, FIL Inc., of course, famed pollster with us here on the program today. One that has been featured by an enormous amount of breaking news here, Kailey. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting winding down. The President of the United States moving 2 nuclear submarines in response to language and rhetoric from Russia. Tariffs taking effect. Jobs Day. Did I miss anything?
Oh, I think that covers it, maybe. Although the day is still young. Yeah. I'm sure something else could very well emerge by the time we reunite at 5 p.m. for the late edition of Balance of Power. So we'll see you then, right here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.